Okay. Robert? Well, because I figured it would be slim pickings tonight, we won't do the book of Job. We'll save that for next week. So I thought, if you go to Exodus chapter 21, Exodus chapter 21, and it's not something that, I would necessarily do on a Sunday morning, because you get to that part of the Bible when you're reading the Bible, it slows down real quick. But I thought tonight, because I knew it would be smaller, we could just take a time and look at some of the things in here. When we're looking at this portion here in Exodus chapter 21, 22, and 23, I mean, it gets really detailed. Oh, do I have this on, Matt? Let's see. No. Yep. Okay. Can I ditch this? All right. I mean, it gets like really detailed. And let's just read a little bit of it. Now, these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. And we're going to read some of this, and we're going to go to chapter 22, read a little bit more, and chapter 23, a little bit more. But I guess the main thing is, what does this have to do with us, right? I mean, I'm not planning on going out and buying a manservant. Now, I will tell you this. I don't know, I wasn't alive during slavery, but, and I don't think that was a good thing. But what could have made it a little bit better is, if you are going to do it, there was a guideline in here on how they should have done it, right? I mean, based on this guideline, you would have never split a family up, because it wouldn't have let you do that. But for us who have really no intentions of ever doing that, you read that and you wonder, okay, in my devotion, I come across this. What am I supposed to do with it? What can I get out with it? Well, when you're reading these 3 chapters, I want you to think about this. God is writing to the children of Israel, and he's getting very specific in their daily life. And he's going down to these little details. And what he's letting us know is that he should have more input in our life than we give him that opportunity. Is that because we're broken and we're under sin, that we really do need somebody to tell us how to think. Now, that's really not, especially for Americans, people, I mean, that's really the truth when we're looking at what's common sense to a lot of us now is only because we've been around some of these teachings. But not, and you would think, and I look in Africa all the time, and I think, well, why isn't that common sense for them? Well, if nobody's told you and nobody's showed you, it wouldn't be common sense. And that is why he's going through this detailed thing and saying, this is how you handle this part of your life. So when we read some of these things, and although you don't ever plan on, getting a servant, I want you to think about everything that we do. The number of things that we go throughout the day. Back then, if I would have said to you, do you think God cares how you handle your livestock? Do you think God cares about how you rotate your crops? You probably would tell me no, but he did. Because a lot of these things he's telling them for is because it wasn't common sense. And so now that I guess we've progressed and have become a lot more, life's changed so much since they lived back then that we think maybe that, we can figure all of this out on our own. We would probably do a whole lot better to look at our day, our week, our life, and say, is God involved? I would want him to be this involved in my life, right? So let's just read a little bit more of this. If he came in hither, if he came by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. So if a guy bought a servant and he ended up getting married, okay, and he were to, at the end of the 6 years, he was set free. All right, that was one of the things that we see. They didn't work for 7 years. Now, this was based on a Jewish slave. These rules didn't fit to somebody who wasn't, but it was built in that you wouldn't be a slave forever. If you were sold into slavery, you were only a slave for 6 years. And then there was grace. Do you know why that's important when I read that? Is because that reminds me that even when God has to chastise us, it won't be forever. He said, if you're going to have a servant, you can only do that for 6 years. On the 7th year, he goes free. Why would God do that? Because God would feel sorry for the guy, right? He would have mercy on him. You would think, well, who's making this rule? God's making this rule. Because why is he making that rule? Because sometimes people aren't merciful. So he has to tell us, you know what, you probably should be kind there, right? Now, for a lot of us that have been raised around Christianity because it's passed down to us, that might be common sense, but to some people it might not be common sense. Well, how much do you push somebody? How much do you, if they owe you something, how far should you go? And what I read in here is that I see grace. He's saying 6 years, and then on the 7th one he goes through. Well, 7 was a number that's near and dear to the heart of God, and you could see why on the 7th year he would go free. On the 7th day he rested. Now, when he did the work week, I mean, do you think honestly God has to take a day off? No. But what he was doing that was for our benefit, showing us. Now, and that was, by the way, even before Adam and Eve fell. They said, that there was a day that God rested. So then it says, if he has a wife, the wife gets to go with him. If his master gave him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. Now, if you read this later on, he will have a chance to redeem them. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judge, and he shall also bring him to the door unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. So he did have a chance. If he wanted to, he would go free, but the wife and the children would stay there, and that is if the master provided the wife. But then he could also say, I don't want to go free. I don't want to leave my wife. I don't want to leave my children. I want to stay and work for you. And he would have that option to do that. But this is God, and remember how we believe the Bible's written, right? So God put it in the mind of Abraham when he was on that mountain, this much detail. He's writing it on a rock. I mean, this is a lot of words to put down, and you would think, why so many and why such detail to everyday life? Because he wanted them to know by human nature, we're going to act one way, and he's dialing it in, and making sure that we understand how he would want us to act. Let's go on down to verse 7. And if a man shall sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her into a strange nation, he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. So this one says, if a guy sells his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men's servants, but the master has a chance to marry her. If he doesn't do that, then she can be redeemed. And you notice that word redeemed gives a chance for grace, okay? Then if you look down here, one of the things that he told him not to do, because these were Jewish slaves, he said, what you can't do, you can't sell a Jewish slave to somebody from a strange nation. Well, why would he do that? Well, it's a pagan nation, and you take somebody outside of what they believe, then that would be a detriment to them. So he said you couldn't do that. You know what that tells us is that you could distinguish even back then from the world and from God. And he said God's people have no business to be in the world. So what you can't do is you can't take God's people and you can't sell them to the world. He had that separated, and it was just a servant. But he wanted to know that there was a difference. So we can look at that when we read that and go, well, how does that apply to me? Well, if he meant that so much then we have to say today, how much do we have or we take part of our lives and put it out in this world? That there ought to be a ditch and a line between us and the world all the time. It shouldn't be blurred. It shouldn't be gray. It should be pretty obvious that those things belong to the world and these things belong to God, and this is the side that we need to live on. And we don't live out over here. Why? Because, that's not where we belong. And so he even provided there an opportunity to do that. Now, go out down to verse 12. He that smiteth a man so that he die, he shall surely be put to death. All right? This is just God giving them common sense things. Why do we have the death penalty in the United States of America? This is why. Men did not come up with this. The Bible came up with it long before. There was a time when godly men ruled our nation, and godly men took the advice from the Bible. That's why it's in there, right? So how did we get the death penalty? Why do other cultures don't have the death penalty? We have it because of the Word of God. And the Word of God's the one that said, if this happens, then you do this. Now, there was no appeals process. There was none of that stuff where it takes 900 years to do that. But when I look at that today and I look at where we're at now, now that stuff's coming back around again. But the reason why you've got crime so high and things like that is because we didn't follow this. Now, I don't plan on killing anybody. So again, what does that mean to me? Well, when I look at that, here's what I can say, is that God's punishment, when he says that, it should be carried out swiftly. When it's not, and then it's just prolonged, then what should happen is, people don't do that, and it's a deterrent. When you look at that and you go, man, I don't want to do that. It has two purposes. Not only punishing the guy who did it, but it says a message to everybody around, don't do that. Same way in the Bible, when somebody commits adultery. In the Bible, somebody got caught committing adultery, they were taken out and stoned immediately. Well, what's the benefit behind that? Every young person's watching that going, no way. Now we don't have that data, but wouldn't you like to know what the rate of that was back then compared to what it is today when you had that hanging over your head? You would have to assume that would cause that to, people would have to think twice about that. Do you really want to do that? Because this is the consequences. You got caught having an affair. This is the consequence. Well, because God didn't want that to spread. Right? Now, I'm thankful for his grace, and that doesn't happen today, but we also see the byproduct of that. I mean, sin always costs something, but because it's not an immediate thing, people it's not treated the same. So let's go a little bit more on this one, and we'll go to chapter 22. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then will I appoint thee a place whether he shall flee. All right, so that's talking about what if you kill somebody because you were protecting yourself? Then is that okay? And obviously it is. And we have that same law today, and this is why. Verse 14, but if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, thou shalt take from mine altar that he may die. And he that smiteth his father or mother, look at this one. He that smiteth his mother or father shall surely be put to death. If you were to hit your mom or dad, God said, take them out and kill them. You're not killing your mom and dad. You're just hitting your mom and dad. Well, why would God do that? Well, what was one of the 10 commandments God said? Honor your father and mother. Do you know what God wants us to know? That society there should be gratitude. Who made us? God. All right? So then we should honor and give God what's due him. Well, mom and dad bring a life into this world. And God says that ought to be honored. The mom and dad ought to be honored. If you hit your father and mother, they took you out and killed you. Well, I wonder how many people did that back then. How many kids were dumb enough to do that? They probably didn't do that very often. Because if he wrote this down, I'm sure somebody tried it, and I'm sure somebody died. Well, when you're reading your devotions and you're thinking, well, you're trying to get through Exodus 21, you're thinking, Well, I look at that and be reminded, whether I'm 56 or you're 12, that God is a special thing in God's heart to honor your parents. And that if you want God's mercy and grace in your life, then we can look at that. I mean, probably if he doesn't want you hitting him, he probably doesn't want you mouthing off to him either, right? If he doesn't want you hitting him, he probably doesn't want you to be disrespecting them with words either. Well, when you look at society today, we're a long way off of that. I mean, people say things to their parents all the time. The attitudes that happen to the parents, the ungrateful attitude for what it takes to feed a kid and take care of a kid, and the things that you do to keep them safe, and then with somebody living in your home not respecting that, well, it just reminds me to God that was a big deal. In fact, it says that it's the first commandment with promise: if you honor your father and your mother, that your days will be long. So it's something that God watches and something that God sees, and he's taking notice of it, so he can tell when a young person respects their mom and dad. And when you respect your mom and dad, well, then apparently it brings the favor of God in that, and why would you not want the favor of God in that, right? Because the byproduct of that would be, if you don't do that, you surely be put to death. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Okay? So and he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. Now, that would go back sort of like, many times when they had slaves in Israel, they were slaves because of debt. Not like what you saw, not what we saw, what we read in the history books about going into other countries and actually removing them from their people. That was not the same thing that they're talking about here. Okay, verse 17, and he that curses his father, well, I guess there it is. He that curses his father or mother shall surely be put to death. Now, I don't know if that curse was like, the cursing that you would do today. But, again, when you read this, you just think, here is the creator of the universe taking the time to dial in life this detail, to the point he even says, this is what I think you should talk to your parents. You cursed them, you're taken out today. Now, I don't know if that was a curse like they do in Africa, where they say the witch doctor's going to curse you, or was just foul language. But now, wouldn't that be good to be put into our society today, right? We're so far off from that. When even as a teenager, you're reading this and you look and say, well, that's probably something I don't ever want to do. Not only because your parents probably aren't going to like it, but God's not going to like it. Verse 19. Verse 18, and if men strive together, and one smite another with a stone or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, if he rise up again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit him, only he shall pay for the loss of his time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. So, if you hurt somebody, then what they say that you ought to do is take care of that responsibility. Okay? If there's it also goes on to an accident, so, if he rise, it says, and if men strive together, and one smote another with a stone or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit, only shall he pay for the loss of his time, and he shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. So if you get in a fight with somebody, and in that process, this guy breaks his leg, while he's doing that and healing, you're not going to get in trouble legally, but God would expect you to take care of him. And then again, would you think God, in all of that he's doing, has time to stop and think, this is why you should do that? Again, a lot of this is common sense because we've been raised around it. Well, God's telling them this, so there's a baseline saying, this is how you run your everyday. So, again, in our lives, do we do that? Is God this detailed in our lives? Do we think about him caring about all the little things that we do? Sometimes we wonder, would God care? Does God care if you get in a fight and you hurt somebody and, he broke his leg? Does God care about that? Well, obviously he does, because he wrote it in there, Does God care if a kid curses his mom and dad? Well, obviously he does, because he wrote it in there. That means he's paying a lot more attention to this than you would think he's doing. All right. Let's go on. Let's just go a little bit more here, and then we'll go on to the next chapter just for a little bit. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief shall follow, he shall be surely punished according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay the judge's detriment. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. So it goes on to say, if men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall surely be punished according to as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as a judge determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. And that's what God's view of judgment here is. And also lets us know that he cares about, a woman with a child, which is why a lot of our laws come from this very same thing. All right, let's, and then down in 23, 24, and 25, if you had this same thing going on today, you wouldn't have long-term incarceration, right? If you stole something, your hand got cut off, right? If you in a crime took somebody's eye, you would just lose your eye. If in a crime you took somebody's foot, they would just take your foot, right? And then, you wouldn't have a sex offenders list, or you wouldn't have to worry about who was a felon. You could pretty much tell who was a felon because they would be missing their arm, right? And it was something they did immediately. And no doubt that had an impact on crime, because you know what I don't find in the Bible in the Old Testament? I don't find the Jews having a prison. Can you find one? The children of Israel did not have a jail. No jail, no prison, no long-term incarceration. It was either death, which was immediate, or you paid for that immediate. You either got beat with stripes that day, or you lost your hand that day, or you lost your eye that day, or they took your tongue out that day. But I can't find here, long-term incarceration, because the laws that they had took care of that judgment quickly. All right, now let's go on to chapter 22 just a little bit, and then 23, and we'll be done. If a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. So if you got, again, they didn't put him in jail. What do they say would happen if you did that? Okay? If a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. And, I figured if God wanted them to have long-term incarcerations, it would say have long-term incarceration. But a lot of things that happen, they go in and they come out, oftentimes knowing a lot more about how to do bad, if they don't get God in their heart. Here, it just happened. This is what you had to do. If you stole, you had to repay it back. Okay? If a thief be found breaking up and be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. So, how we have the right to protect your home law? Well, because God said you can do that, right? It says, if a thief be found breaking up and be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. So, you come along and somebody's stealing your car back then, or your camels, or whatever in the world it is. If you killed that guy doing it, you don't get in trouble. He shouldn't be doing that. And that is, and so we have the, I don't know, stand your ground law, whatever that thing is today. Well, God came up with it a lot more before that. if the theft be certainly found in his hand alive, whether it be ox or ass or sheep, he shall restore double. So if he steals it, but you get your stuff back, he would have to give you twice as much. So if the guy steals your sheep, and he doesn't kill it yet or sell it, but you catch it in his possession, well, then you get twice as much back. He has to give you those back, and then he's got to go back and give you double, right? Which I'm sure probably took care of the theft back then. If a man shall cause a field or a vineyard to be eaten, and shall put in his beast, and shall feed in another man's field, or the best of his own field, and the best of his own vineyard, shall he make restitution. He says, because, again, this would be common sense to us. He's dialing life. And I was reading this one day, and I thought, what in the world has this got anything to do with me, right? Just being obedient and reading, these things. And I started thinking, we go to work, we have neighbors, we have employees, or we are an employee. We've got government we got to deal with, and we got family we got to deal with. All around us, there's other people living. And sometimes I think, what is God interested in? Well, he's interested in me going to church. He's interested in me not sinning. But does he really have an opinion about everything else that I do? And it appears that he does, right? And then I wonder how many times that we stop and think about things like, well, what kind of friends would he want me to have? What kind of stuff would he want to, what I ought to do in my spare time? Does God care? Or is there things up there that he really doesn't have any opinion on? Well, to be this detailed in all of these things, I would say that he probably does care probably a little bit more than we think. Verse 6, if a fire break out and catch in thorns, so that the stacks of corn or standing corn or the field be consumed therewith, he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. All right, now go on to chapter 23, and you can read all these later, but there's no way in the world we're going to read all of it. I just wanted to, each chapter takes it a little bit further. Thou shalt not raise a false report, put not thy hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. So he's still going on, and we're 3 chapters into it, and there's just so many of these things that he's telling them. All this little details here. Here it says, thou shalt not raise a false report, but put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. That slander that's not true, he doesn't like. And then if you give a false report and it is false, that he looks at it as being a negative thing. Well, my word, that would solve a lot of problems, right? He apparently cares if you slander somebody. He apparently cares if you say something about somebody that's not true, right? That he would look unkind about that. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Wow, what a verse. Look at that verse. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. Many times, if you're going to do right, you're going to be in the minority, even today. And what God says, don't follow the masses, right? That's going to be the least resistance. But he says, don't follow the multitude to do evil. So how can you apply that? Well, remember the children of Israel, they're going to go into the promised land. The spies come back, and the majority of the spies say, we can't do this. Too strong, too big. We're like grasshoppers. We can't do this. 2 guys come back, and they say, no, we can't do this. Well, they broke their own law right here. Because what God told them to do is so you got these guys, and then they get the whole children of Israel, and they follow him, and he's saying, Dave, don't follow the multitude. If you're in that big crowd, well then stop and think, man, am I really on the right side? You know, if I fit in with the world's ideology and the things that they're doing, okay, you know, if I'm on board with everything they're doing, there has to be in Christian life. We're talking about it Monday, about walking in the flesh or walking in the Spirit. If you're going to walk in the Spirit, there has to be a list of things you don't do. Now, the masses will do so much, right? They're not paying attention to church. They're not paying attention to pleasing God. The things that they do and the things that they run after, like there's no tomorrow, sometimes we get sucked up in that. And then you stop and you go, wait a minute. They're marching off a cliff. I don't belong with that group. I shouldn't be comfortable with that group. I shouldn't follow that group. Well, why? Because he told Israel, listen, don't follow the multitude. Even in your own people, you know, there might be, even amongst you know, their own folks, you know, they because this was written for Israel. Let's see, down to verse 3. Neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. You know, many times in the Bible it talks about how you treat somebody less that's more needy than yourself. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. What does it say in the New Testament? Love your enemies. Was that a new thing in the New Testament? Apparently not. Here it says, if thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back. Now, who in the world likes to be kind to somebody you don't like? I don't. I mean, if it's somebody I don't like, I don't really want to talk to them. I certainly don't want to see them. And if I saw their cow get out of their gate, I'd probably drive by and go, well, good luck with that. But then God seems to have an opinion about that. I mean, here's a guy, you know, Moses writing this stuff down on a rock where you can't just freely print stuff. I mean, you got to go through a lot of effort. And then he protected this all the way to this day, and he wanted me to know, Dave, you shouldn't do that. God's people shouldn't do it. As a Christian, you shouldn't do it. If you see your enemy's ox, although you'd rather watch it get hit by a car, you should probably stop. Do you know why he would care? Because when Christ met us, were we a friend or an enemy? Well, we were an enemy. So God practiced what he preached. He loved his enemy. And even when I was in it, do you know even when we were unsaved, he still watched over our families? Because God's in control of our jobs, he's in control of the economy. The Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust. So he's saying, that's how I treated you guys. You were my enemy, and this is how I treated you. So when it comes to your life and your enemy, even though you don't what you ought to do, get out, make sure his ox go back in. Well, I don't like him. Look what he did to me. And God would say, well, it doesn't matter because you are my people, and this is who I am. This is what you're reading, these are the thoughts from God. This is God's opinion on life, not just my opinion on life. It's God's opinion on life. Okay, if thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. So it says, if thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Thou shalt not rest the judgment of the poor in his cause. He's saying, look, if you get out there and help him, he's going over that again. Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay not, for I will not justify the wicked. He's saying, keep far from a false matter. Don't have anything to do with that. And the innocent and the righteous slay not, for I will not justify the wicked. And thou shalt take no gift, for the gift blindeth the wise. Now you look at this, and we'll probably stop here. When you look at what we're having to do with all this bureaucracy thing, so what are they saying? They're saying, Okay, how do these congressmen come in and they're making $200,000 a year, and after so many years of being a congressman, they're leaving with, several $1 million. Now, how's this happening? And what are they saying? Well, there's got to be some kickback somewhere. And I often wondered, apparently, like, even if you give the president a T-shirt, he's not supposed to keep that T-shirt. I forget, the guy in Chicago is getting in trouble because there's some shoes that are missing that he was given, size 14 shoes, which only fits him. And they're nice shoes. Somebody gave it to him. There's this little museum that they're supposed to go into, and he didn't put them in the museum. He's wearing them there. And I was honestly on the news, I'm like, big deal. So he kept a hat, right? Or, so he, kept a pair of shoes that some, businessman comes in and says, hey, Mayor, I want to give you these shoes. Apparently you're not supposed to keep them, right? I mean, Trump can't even keep a T-shirt. And I thought, well, what's the big deal in all of that, right? Who cares? Well, then you read that and you think, well, maybe there's a little bit of wisdom to that, because he said, let's see, and thou shalt take no gift, for the gift blindeth the wise, and perverteth the words of the righteous. So he's saying, if you take a gift, especially if you're in any kind of leadership thing like that, if you take a gift, then that gift may cause you to not have the right judgment that you should have. And I thought, well, I guess he knows what he's doing, right? Because today, they're thinking, well, if he takes shoes off of me, even though I'm not saying, look, I'm going to give you these shoes, you give me this contract. They don't do that. They just say, well, let me give you this really nice tool bag or whatever it is, golf clubs, or here's a set of golf clubs. And I'm thinking, really, can a set of golf clubs cause somebody to want to, like, give a contract to somebody? Well, apparently, God knows human nature. So God sticks it in this list and says, don't take a gift. Because I guess what he's saying, that, something that we know, it's never free, right? They're going to expect something out of that. So it's better just not to do that. And you can literally just go through this whole thing. And it just keeps going. It says, thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, seeing that you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You know that a stranger visiting the Jewish people during Passover, there was a way for them to do the Passover. He said that thou shalt not oppress the heart of a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers on land. He was saying, if you come by and you see somebody from another that they're not from where you are, be kind to them. Be polite to them. Let them stay with you. Make sure they've got some food. Feed them. Why? He said, because you were a stranger and you remember what it was like to be a stranger. So be kind to strangers. It even goes on, we can say this, that for you and I, if we see a sinner, somebody that we know is actively doing something that's spiritually wrong. And there are a lot of things that are spiritually wrong that might not be wrong in our with the laws, right? So if you know somebody that's a sinner, you see somebody and they're living in the world, are we supposed to act better than they do? Or are we supposed to act like they're beneath us? Are we supposed to be unkind? Are we supposed to avoid them that way? Are we supposed to treat them different because they're in sin? Well, it would go the same way. You know why God wouldn't want me to do that? Because I was a sinner, right? He would say, Dave, out of anybody ought to be kind to sinners, you ought to be kind to a sinner. Anybody that ought to care about a sinner, remember, you probably didn't get saved the first time you heard the gospel, right? Probably took more than one time. And all that time you were lost. Were people in church kind to you? Now, maybe you didn't have the outward signs. You're not all tattooed up and, all of those things that sometimes people, because they've been in the world, but you're still a sinner and on your way to hell. Your Sunday school teacher's kind to you. They mention for you in prayer. The church is kind. They pray for you because they know you're not lost, that you're lost. And they're really, but sometimes when a person looks like a sinner, well, then oftentimes we're like, we treat them different. They don't look the same. But they're all sinners, right? And he's saying, Dave, the reason why when you look, there is a picture in Pakistan. Oh man, I did that again. And on this trip, this guy was on the ground. He had his feet. They weren't formed properly, and they were stuck underneath of him. So he's only this big. That's it. This marketplace is packed, right? There's people everywhere. And I've not been here before, so I'm looking around thinking, make sure we're all right where we're at, because this guard's standing there with me. And this guy literally starts rolling down the road, because he can't walk. His feet are stuck underneath of him, right? And he's got a plate in his hand, and I don't know how he does it, but when he rolls, he keeps the plate level so what's in it doesn't fall out. And nobody is paying attention to that man. Nobody. They don't care. And it's probably one of the most pitiful things I've ever seen in my life. Right? I mean, it's disturbing. And I thought, how did we get to this point where there could be 500 people within earshot of what he's saying and nobody feel for that guy? So I took some money out and gave it to one of the guys. I didn't want to see if I did it, then there'd be like 9 million people coming over. So I gave it to one of the nationals, and he went over and gave it to the guy, because there's just no way in the world anybody with any kind of heart is going to walk over there. Well, I don't have that problem. Well, we all have a sin problem. We were all alienated from God, and God says, Dave, when you see a stranger, be kind to a stranger. Well, why? Because one time you were a stranger to me, right? And I reached out to you. So this is just how I want you to act. And this will probably be nothing I ever preach on Sunday morning, because it's all over the charts, right? But I thought it'd be a good place. You can take away with this. Look at your life and sit down and say, have I ever thought about all these other things, every business decision I make, every family decision I make, my own personal decisions? Does God have an opinion about all of this? Well, I'm sure. And how oftentimes do I think, it even goes on like how you treat your animals. I'm not a like an animal activist, but even goes in there on how you treat your animals. It's like, why would you have to tell somebody how to do that? Well, back then God thought that, all of this detail, and I'm thinking, all right, how much would he say today in the 21st century? And we were to say, okay, God, give us a list. I know you probably think it's common sense, but we're probably not as smart as you think we are. Go through my whole entire day and analyze it. What would you do and wouldn't you do? And I promise he'll have an opinion on that. But oftentimes we only think that he cares about, church, the big things, the big sins and all of those things. I mean, he even cares all the way down to what you think on a daily moment. That's pretty scary. Okay, the end.